Hey everyone, UFC 288 is just around the corner, and in this video, I'm gonna take a look at the co-main event as well as the main event. I'm gonna take a look at the fighters themselves, how I think the fight's gonna go, and in general, just who I think's gonna win. So for the co-main event, we've got Bilal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns. It's a bit of a weird situation with what's going on. They're taking a fight on short notice, but Gilbert Burns just had a fight, and Bilal Muhammad's been calling for a fight for a while. So in a way, it's not short notice because they've both been wanting fights, and I believe that both fighters have been training. But yeah, let's talk about it. Bilal Muhammad last fought in October. He had a TKO win, and ever since then he's been talking a lot, asking for fights, calling out fights and stuff like that. So that would lead me to believe that he's been training. He's a disciplined guy. So I do think that he's training full time. I don't think that he's taking the fight, off the couch. I think he's going to be actively training, looking for fights, and that's probably one of the reasons that he has the confidence to take the fight on the week's notice. And originally he wanted to fight at a catch weight, but the UFC were just like no. So he took the fight at 170, which is kind of another reason to believe that he has been training. He can make the weight. Some people have been talking about Ramadan, how Ramadan's just finished and he's fighting like a week later. But I don't think that that's going to affect him too much because he's fought during Ramadan before. His second to most recent fight was during Ramadan and he won. So I think that he's got like a good training routine for Ramadan. I don't think that's going to impact the fight too much. And then Gilbert Burns fought less than a month ago on the last pay-per-view. He got a decision win over Jorge Masvidal. So in my opinion, taking a fight a month after just having a fight has some pros and cons. I think one of the cons is after a fight, people like to celebrate, people like to eat, drink, not train as much. And if you take a fight on short notice, it's going to be difficult to get into fight shape and make weight if you've just been celebrating your last fight. This can kind of depend on the fighter themselves. I think Gilbert probably trains all year round, he's healthy all year round. So I think this kind of mitigates what I just said. Some fighters kind of do the Paddy Pimblett where after a fight they'll just balloon up. And to be honest, I don't think that Burns is one of those people. I think he's one of those guys that stays in shape all year round and wants to fight often. The other main con of fighting so frequently is you don't really give your body much of a chance to recover, specifically your brain. And in Gilbert's fight, he didn't take too much damage, but you have to remember that damage is still damage. Your brain doesn't heal like your body does. And in the training camp, there would have been, hard sparring. And I think it is important to let your body recover. The example that I always go back to, and I've spoken about this before, is after Stipe fought Francis the first time, he took a lot of damage, he won by decision, and he fought 6 months later against Cormier, and it didn't look like the same person, he just couldn't take the same amount of damage. And that was after a 6 month layoff. Now obviously Gilbert Burns didn't take as much damage as Stipe, but it is still something to consider. Now, the pros of fighting often, obviously, your body is still fitter, it's healthier. And if you look at the mental side, if Gilbert's coming off a win, he's going to be going into the next fight with more confidence than a loss. And since the next fight is so close, the momentum is carried forward. He's going to be more confident because he literally just won. So, in my opinion, I think that even though this is a short notice fight, I think both fighters have been training, and it's not as if they were like on the couch drinking beers. So, to go into the actual fight itself, to be honest, I think it's quite a bad matchup for Bilal. With Bilal, he's one of those fighters he's good everywhere, but his skills kind of work to Gilbert's advantage. When you look at his striking, he's kind of one of those guys that tries to overwhelm people. He's not one of these people that carries like crazy knockout power. And to be honest, I think that kind of works to Gilbert's advantage because Gilbert fights. When he fought Hamza, he went to war. And when he's been beaten in the striking, it's been against like power punches. He struggled more with power punches. Because Bilal doesn't carry a lot of power, Gilbert's not going to feel threatened and he's going to do what he does best and come forward and throw overhands. I think Bilal is skilled enough in the striking for it to be competitive on the feet, but ultimately I don't see how he's going to win on the feet because he's not going to overwhelm Gilbert and he's not going to KO Gilbert. And then when we get to the grappling, I think Bilal is more of a grappler than a striker, but he mixes up pretty well. But unfortunately, he's fighting Gilbert Burns. Gilbert has one of the scariest styles for wrestlers because of how easy they can fall into submissions. You know, we've seen how dominant Hamza Chimaev is with his wrestling, and he didn't really want to go to the ground with Gilbert, and Usman didn't. I don't think that Bilal is really gonna want to go to the ground with Gilbert because of how dangerous Gilbert is, and if he does, he's got to be really careful because he could get submitted. Bilal's takedowns aren't the most like they're pretty traditional, so Gilbert's going to be used to it. So to predict the fight, I think there's going to be a bit of stand-up exchanges. I actually think Gilbert will try and shoot on Bilal, but I think is going to be able to defend Gilbert's takedowns. On the feet, I see Bilal kind of he's doing okay on the feet, but I think that his boxing defense is not the best ever, and I actually think that Gilbert is going to hurt Bilal on the feet, which is going to cause Bilal to shoot. And then I think that Gilbert Burns is going to submit Bilal Muhammad in the second round. I think for most of the fight, Bilal's going to be kind of deflecting the overhands, defending the takedowns. But I think at some point, an overhand's going to get through, and it's just going to kind of change the course of the fight. I think he's going to go for a takedown. It's going to get, reversed, and Gilbert Burns lands a guillotine. I could be wrong. Bilal likes to prove people wrong, but even from an unbiased point of view, I just think he doesn't match up very well with Gilbert Burns. But on to the next fight. So Aljamain Sterling and Henry Cejudo. I've been thinking about this fight for weeks, and honestly, I've been going back and forth for those weeks. Henry Cejudo is incredibly skilled. Aljamain Sterling is overlooked because he's kind of the unfortunate champion, and there's kind of a lot of X factors you gotta think about. And yeah, this fight is very hard to pick. I see a lot of people on the internet, they're like absolutely certain. I mean, it is the internet and people do like to exaggerate, but a lot of people are absolutely certain that Aljamain's gonna dominate. People are adamant that Henry Cejudo is gonna fraud check Sterling. But I've been on the fence for this entire time. It's such a hard fight to pick for me. The main X factor, in my opinion, is Henry Cejudo is coming off a 3-year layoff. He's 36. He's obviously towards the end of his career. 36 may not seem too old, but it's kind of weird because we see like the smaller weight classes, fighters tend to kind of exit their prime quicker, and then with the bigger weight classes, fighters seem to do better when they're older. Like Jan Blachowicz is like 40 years old. John Jones is 35 and he's moving up to heavyweight. A lot of the heavyweights are like, late 30s. And then we see with some of the smaller weight classes, fighters kind of exit their prime like before their late 30s, So Cejudo is older, but he's also been off for 3 years, which is a long time. Different fighters kind of act different after layoffs. We just saw John Jones come back after 3 years, and he just like ran through Cyril Gane. But then some people have like a layoff. The one person I think of is Santiago Ponzinibbio. He was like tearing people apart, and then he had like 2 years off, and he came back, and he just wasn't the same. So some people take 3 years off and come back like they never been gone. Some people take time off and they don't even look the same. Henry Cejudo kind of contradicts himself because he retires and he looks a little bit out of shape in photos and stuff like that. But he's been talking about coming back ever since he retired, so it's a bit confusing. There's been stuff of him training. He trains fighters. He trained with John Jones. He trained with Zhang Weili. He's been doing stuff with Demetrius Johnson. So he's been active, but how active, I'm not so sure. If I have to kind of go with my gut feeling, I don't think he's going to look the same just because it's a long time to have off. He's older now, and just kind of all the things I mentioned. If I had to like guess, I don't think he's going to come back looking the same. if you look at John Jones, who came back after a 3 year layoff, he came back and moved to heavyweight, which is like the slowest. It's not trying to be mean, but it's like the slowest weight class. It's kind of the least skilled. And then Henry Cejudo is coming back to 135, which a lot of people think is the best weight class. And then when you watch Henry Cejudo fight, you see just like how technical he is, and some of those technical skills might not be there after such a long layoff. And by the way, if you watch the press conference between Henry Cejudo and Aljamain Sterling, I'm sorry you had to go through that. It was not the most pleasant thing to watch. Henry Cejudo calling himself like a hitman, it was just, yeah, it made me a little bit, made me nauseous. But yeah, sorry, like I was saying, I just think that Henry Cejudo kind of getting a little bit out of shape in between fights, having such a long layoff, and being in, one of the quickest, most technical weight classes in the UFC, where like, the smallest movements influence the entire fight. I just, I find it hard to believe that he's gonna come back and look as good as he did when he left. Well, when you watch his fight with like Dominic Cruz, you see like the Dominic Cruz one in particular, you see like how technical he is. You see like his feints, his catching of kicks, his own kicks. It's so technical, and technique gets lost if it's not used. But yeah, I think I've kind of gone on long enough about that. I've made my point. On the other side, we have Aljamain Sterling, and Aljamain, he's obviously been more active. Um, he's kind of known as the unfortunate champion because of how he got the belt and his recent fights. A very close decision, which a lot of people think he lost, and then fighting someone with one arm. A lot of people think that he's overrated and like a fake champion and all these things, and it's understandable because of the nature of his fights. But before he became champion, people were like demanding that he gets a title shot and things like that. And if you want to kind of know how good he is, watch his fight with Corey Sandhagen and watch how good Corey Sandhagen's been doing lately. Corey had like a close fight with Jan. He beat like the upcoming Song Yadong, who just had a great win. He beat Chito Vera, who people are very high on, and Sterling just like completely blasted right through him. He choked him out in about 2 minutes. So even though his fights have kind of weird endings, weird situations, it's a very dangerous thing to underestimate Aljamain Sterling. He's also in his prime right now, which you could argue that Henry Cejudo is not. So maybe that can influence the fight. So if we look at the actual skills of the fighters, both fighters in the stand-up tend to be quite kick-heavy, and they both will catch kicks. I think that Henry Cejudo has better kicks than Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain's aren't the most technical. He kind of just throws them to overwhelm. But we saw when Henry fought Marlon Moraes, he struggled a lot with the inside kicks. The outside kicks, he did a really good job of moving out the way and defending and catching. But with the inside kicks, he seemed to have a lot of trouble with that. Aljamain Sterling, his striking style, it looks a little bit more messy, because that's just kind of the fighter that he is. He'll try and catch like every single kick that comes at him. His own kicks won't be as like set up as beautifully. It's a bit more rugged. And then neither fighter is the best boxer in the world. I watched Henry. He seems a little like hesitant when he kind of enters exchanges. He seems to kind of not really want to enter the exchanges. And then Aljo, his punches look a little bit stiff. Like I said, he's a bit more of a messy fighter, but his punches themselves look stiff, and we've seen that they don't really carry much power. Overall, I think that Henry Cejudo has like a better striking style. He's also used to fighting flyweights, and he's super quick at like stepping out of the way of kicks, catching kicks. I'd say he's defensively a lot better than Sterling, but I don't think either fighter is the best striker in the world. I think in the striking, I think if Henry Cejudo comes back the way he was before, I think he's just gonna kind of control the striking. He's gonna be quick enough to catch Aljo's kicks. He's gonna be able to avoid Aljo's kicks, and he's gonna be able to land punches and kicks of his own, especially against Sterling, who isn't the most experienced striker ever. Where the fight gets interesting and also competitive is the ground. Henry Cejudo is a lot better with just the pure wrestling. Obviously, he's an Olympian and everything. He's used it to win many fights. Sterling isn't as much of a wrestler, but where he gets takedowns is off of like scrambles. You know, he'll kind of catch a kick, and they'll defend the first takedown attempt, but then he'll reverse it and take that back and stuff like that. It's kind of a similar concept as the striking, where Aljamain Sterling's style is a lot more messy, but in some cases that makes it more effective because fighters kind of don't know what to do in those like messy situations and the scrambling and stuff like that. In my opinion, Henry Cejudo can take Sterling down if he wants to, but I'm not sure that Sterling is going to be able to take Henry Cejudo down. Sterling's great at kind of making exchanges and scrambling and out scrambling his opponent basically, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to do that to Cejudo, who's smaller and a lot quicker. And the part where I was really going back and forth is when it gets to the ground, what's going to happen? What's most likely is Henry's going to take down Aljo. So Aljo's probably going to be like on his back, probably in guard, something like that. I doubt he's going to get like mounted or anything like that. It just, the bit that I'm stuck on is he going to be able to like make an exchange and, you know, possibly submit Henry or reverse the position and take his back? We've never seen anyone be able to do that to Cejudo, but then we have to remember all the other factors, you know, the inactivity, the fact that he's going up against a big bantamweight when he's spent most of his career at flyweight. This is the part where I've had the most trouble. I've gone back and forth, but the fight's in a couple of days, and I think that Aljamain Sterling is going to be able to pull something off. What I kind of think about when I talk about fights and predicting fights is a lot of the times there's so many X factors that you can't just look at the skills. I think if we took Henry Cejudo from 2020, he's just beaten Dominic Cruz, and we put him against Aljamain Sterling, I think that Henry Cejudo would win. But you have to take in all of these like X factors, you know, the layoff, the age, the confidence of Sterling because he's a champion. What I think is going to happen as the fight is I think both fighters are going to be throwing a lot of kicks. Henry's going to be quicker because he's smaller and because he just naturally is. So I think he's going to kind of avoid a lot of Aljo's and land a couple of his own. I think that Aljo is going to at some point catch some of his kicks, but I think that Cejudo is going to be able to defend the takedowns. But overall, I don't see much happening on the feet. But where it gets interesting is, at some point, I think that Cejudo is going to catch Aljo's kicks and then probably take him down. It's going to be a mix of him taking him down and Sterling kind of going on his back willingly. And I think what's going to happen is, I think that Sterling is going to be able to reverse the position, and eventually I think he's going to be able to take Cejudo's back. And this is going to I think this is going to happen kind of like early to midway through the fight. So they kind of exchange a bit for on the feet, and then Cejudo takes Sterling down. Sterling kind of reverses, and I think that this is kind of where the course of the fight is going to change a little bit in favor of Sterling. And this is kind of where I think that the X factors are going to come into play, where Cejudo he's not used to fighting someone as big as Sterling, and he's had a lot of time off. I think that Sterling is going to kind of have some success with reversing position, and then that success is going to just magnify more and more and more as the fight goes on. So this fight was so hard for me to predict, but when we look at all of the factors, not just the fighter's skills themselves, I'm going to have to go with Aljamain Sterling, and I think he gets it done by a late submission. But to be honest, that's not a super confident pick, because for all we know, Cejudo could come back and he could be just the same as he was. And I think if we see, you know, the 2019-2020 version of Cejudo, I think he's good enough to beat Sterling. So yeah, my predictions for the fights, I've got Gilbert Burns by a guillotine, I reckon. And then for Sterling and Cejudo, I think Sterling is going to have Cejudo's back, and eventually he's going to get a rear naked choke in round 5. So far my predictions have been a bit mixed. I've been good on Leon Edwards and John Jones, but not so much on the others. So, you know, don't bet the house on my picks, please. But yeah, that's my video. The last video I did actually did really well. It got like 1,000. So far it's on 1,699 views. So I'm kind of hoping it gets to 1,700. That'd be pretty cool. But I think that my fighter breakdowns get more attention than my predictions, which makes sense. So my next video is going to be a fighter breakdown. I'm not sure on who yet, but I'm going to get to work on it soon. But thank you for watching. Let me know what you think is going to happen in the fight. I hope everyone enjoys the fights, and I will see you next time.